Welcome into Sports Map Houston. I'm Brandon Strange. You might remember the guy in the box next to me. That's AJ Hoffman. You can catch him at pregame.com and on his new show, Straight Out of Vegas, weekdays, 6 Eastern, 5 Central on Fox Sports Radio. AJ, welcome in. A lot of excitement in Houston around the Rockets. You are always one of our favorite people to talk NBA draft with. Let's get to it. Let's start at number 3, 6'10" from Auburn, Jabari Smith Jr. Now, originally projected to go number 1, you monitored all this at the last minute, a lot of changing here. Even up 2 hours beforehand, Woj said it's going to be Smith, Holmgren, Banchero. That did not turn out the case. Smith fell to number 3. What happened there? And do you think the Rockets really did pull off getting a number 1 at 3?
So first of all, it's one of the craziest betting market moves that we've seen in NBA, NFL, any of these draft prop histories. And there was a time where, Jabari Smith was the favorite to go number 1 all week. And then we saw a lot of steam on draft day, the night before the draft. And in fact, up about 5 a.m. on draft day, Paolo Banchero was the favorite to go number 1. And then Woj put that out, and it was there was a lot of plausible deniability. It was very vague. It was, as draft boards firm, it didn't say Paolo Banchero is going number 1 or Jabari Smith's going number 1. It said, it looks like this is the case. Of course, a lot of bettors took that to be gospel, money on Banchero. And then you start to see a bunch of money push back or on Banchero instead of Jabari Smith and say, no, Woj is wrong. And anytime that happens, that means there's somebody who's got better information, because clearly the money was being the money that was being moved towards Jabari Smith going 1 was from that Woj bomb. All the rest of the money knew something different, and that ended up being the right money. I think this is the best case scenario for the Rockets. I think that I know they were in love with Paolo. And from what I heard, if they had the first pick, they would have taken Paolo. I think that would have been a mistake. Jabari Smith is probably the most complete guy in this draft. And with the Rockets as they're currently constructed, he fits really well. They just shipped Christian Wood out because he didn't fit with Sengun in the front. Well, for many reasons, but one of them being he didn't fit with Sengun in the front court because they had defensive liabilities. There are no defensive liabilities with Jabari Smith. This guy is an elite defensive player and happens to be a really great 3-point shooter as well. So he's going to be able to stretch the floor and open things up for Sengun inside. I think that if this was not what they wanted, it should have been what they wanted all along.
If you had to compare him to somebody, who would you comp him to?
I think if he meets his potential, Chris Bosh is a good comp. I think he's got that kind of upside. I think he may be better defensive, like a better defensive upside than Chris Bosh. But I think offensively, like late Chris Bosh, when Chris Bosh found his shot, I think that's what he could project to be.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to this second pick, number 17. This was Brooklyn's pick from the James Harden deal. This became a lot more valuable than people had originally anticipated because of what went on in Brooklyn. Forward from LSU, Tari Eason. You tell me what you think, because he's got the length of a forward, quickness of a guard. How ready is he for the NBA?
He's ready. He's going to be really a contributor on one end early on. He is another elite defensive player. I think the Rockets got probably 2 of the top 5 defensive players in this draft with him and Smith. He's more of a role player type guy. I don't think he's going to be an NBA star, but I do think he can defend 1 through 4. He's got great length, combo forward. His shot is not there. Obviously, that's something they hope that can evolve as his career goes on, but he doesn't have a mid-range, doesn't have a deep shot. So it's really just scoring at the bucket. He's a great athlete, so he should have a good time getting to the basket, but creating his own shot, that's going to be tough for him. But defensively, he's there. He's ready. He can defend bigs. He can defend the guards. He's going to be all over the place. And again, when you talk about what the Rockets have in place before this draft, Jalen Green had the worst defensive rating of any player in the league this year. Any player in the league. So, and we know Sengun's not a great defender. Like, they needed guys who could fill these roles. If your stars are going to be offensive minded players, and let's face it, We've seen this in Houston before, where the core of the team was all offense, no defense. And there's a limit to how good you can be. So they decided, hey, let's fill in these gaps with strong defensive players. That's what they did. And I think he could be a good role player for this team for sure.
A guy who I think caught a lot of Rockets fans' eyes was a guy who fell to number 29, where the Rockets were able to pick 6'4" guard from Kentucky, TyTy Washington. Now, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, but he had issues with his leg and ankle. Is that why he fell so far? Because he was originally projected early on to be a lottery pick.
Yeah, no doubt that's what happened. And you saw there's a clear, if you look at his game log and you see what he did in college, there's a clear line where TyTy's game went from great to okay. And it was around the time of that ankle injury. And if that's all cleared up, which I assume it is by now, he's got real potential. He's not an elite athlete. He's 6'3". So a smallish for a guard that is probably better served playing off ball than on ball. He can play either, though. He is a combo guy. Reminds me a little bit of Andre Miller. But he does a lot of things right. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. He's a smart player. And, for a team that was in need of some guards who could handle the ball, good passing guards, he fits the bill. His upside, I would say, is that lottery type guy. But I do think you're right. The ankle injury really kind of mushed his stock a bit.
Well, so you've kind of hinted at this a little bit, kind of how these picks fit in. We saw, Jalen Green was slow out of the gate last season, but really blossomed in the second half. You mentioned the departure of Christian Wood. That opens up Şengün with more minutes in the front court there. Josh Christopher, a guy who you weren't really high on coming out of the draft. He really took some nice steps in his NBA development as well last season. What are your thoughts with how these draft picks fit in with the young core that the Rockets are building around in Houston?
Yeah, you mentioned Christopher, who actually ended up being a lot better of a two-way player than I thought he was going to be. I think that, again, this was the draft that they needed. This was a draft that put strengths next to their weaknesses and really didn't detract from anything that they're doing. So it looked like it was the buildings of a bad defensive team that was going to just try to outscore everyone. And they don't have a point guard to run the show. And if you're going to try to outscore everyone, you need to have somebody who's in charge of the offense. So I think they fixed that with Washington. I think that Smith, it's not like he's going to be a negative on the offensive end, but he's so much better than anything they had on defense. And Eason's the same way, a guy who will probably end up coming off the bench, but is going to be a guy who you can put on another team's best player and say, hey, slow this guy down, and he should be able to do it. So I really think that, the Rockets, who have been in a pretty dark place the last few years, this is another big step for them in the right direction.
Well, it is a superstar-driven league, so unless they get a bona fide superstar they're building around, they may not, take large steps forward. What do you think your ceiling for the Rockets would be? Do you see them possibly contending for a play-in position on the bottom of the playoffs, or do you think we're in for at least one more year of high draft picks?
I think if things come together, I think they could contend for a play-in spot. I think for the long term of this team, the best thing to do would have another top 6, top 7 pick. Ideally, you're not picking third again, because then it was just another complete disaster. But if you're picking in the top 6, top 7, you've got another shot to add a wing that can really be impactful. And you have a core of Green, Smith, and insert, top 10 pick there. I think that the likelihood that one of those 3 guys doesn't become a star is pretty low. So you're right. It is a superstar driven league. There's a lot of star potential in Jalen Green. There's a lot of star potential in Jabari Smith. If one of those guys hits, great. This year, great. If you're in the play-in situation this year, great. You'll have a top 15 pick next year to add to that core. But I do think the best thing that could happen to them is they end up with a top 10 pick, because they're not, even if they do get to the play, and they're not a team that's going to be ready to contend next season. So they're at least a year or two away from that. But I think just for the fans, for the front office, I don't think that Tillman's the most patient guy. I think he wants to start seeing some progress, some results. So I think that's a good goal. But as long as you're not one of the 2 or 3 worst teams in the league this year, I'd say it's a good start for this Rockets team.
Give the Rockets a grade on how they did this year in the draft.
It's an A. I mean, again, like the idea that the player that they really needed fell to them at 3, whether they knew it or not, it ended up just being perfect for them. So I don't know that they could have done better with that pick. Chet Holmgren was my favorite player in this draft. I don't think that he would have fit with the Rockets as well as what Jabari Smith did. So I think things just fell perfectly for them. So this was about as good as the draft could have gone for them, in my opinion. So and again, you mentioned the fact that the Nets pick turned into the 17th pick, which you would have never thought. You probably would have thought they'd be picking 30th, 29th, or 30th with that. So I think all in all, this ended up being a great week for the Rockets. So this is I'm going to give them an A for this week.